I'm going to change hats for a second.
Yeah.
I've been interviewer. Now I'm going to be friend of Anthony.
Okay.
Because I don't get to hang out with Anthony, and we didn't get to hang out this past week. So forgive me. This is now going to be just you guys participating in me and Anthony talking. And for those of you who get mad that I talk too much in interviews, I've shown a lot of restraint today. But now I'm going to have a conversation with Anthony.
Perfect.
So, on the one hand, we all want these. We all want to look at these tea leaves and read them as if Holland's having a faith crisis and Christofferson's right with us, and maybe Ballard's cracking. When I've tried to talk to John Hamer about this anymore, my sense is that he doesn't, as one person, doesn't have a real taste for this type of thing. He calls it Kremlin watching.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, I remember how much hope we had. You know, we would all just say, well, when Packer dies, you know,
yeah,
when Packer dies, everything's going to change. And they're, on the one hand, let's Maxine Hanks is doing whatever she's doing, and the neo-apologists are doing whatever they're doing, and Fluman and Mason and Barlow and Givens and Bushman, they're all in there working hard as beavers trying to, and let's celebrate all that in some way and say we hope things change, because honestly, for no other reason, well, we love the church, we love the people in it.
Yep.
And even if you hate the church and the people in it, well, if you hate the church, there's still a lot of people who are being affected by it. So,
and you want it to be healthy for the love of people that you have in there. Yeah.
But it's also hard, because you will know that there have been people around for decades who were saying this about Hubie Brown back then, and who were saying this about, and they've broken our hearts a lot. Yeah. And they've shown this capacity to give us hope. It's kind of like Armand Moss and the Angel in the Beehive, retrenchment and assimilation. Yeah. They've shown this incredible ability to stretch and grow and then dash our hopes. And you know, I think we all know that what keeps them from doing this, there's that quote, you know, Martin Luther King quote, that power never relinquishes itself voluntarily, it must be forced. Martin Luther King said that, I believe. Yeah. And he was just talking about how in the civil rights movement, they were patient and kind and diplomatic, and nothing ever changed. And it wasn't until they were like filling the jail cells and embarrassing Lyndon B. Johnson or John F. Kennedy on national news that change happened. Yeah. And so I guess I'm saying two things. One is they break our hearts a lot, and I think the reason why they do that is because they know, you know, these support groups, they may want to be tolerant of them, but they know that as soon as Mormons start talking, the virus of doubt starts spreading. Yep. And they worry that if they're too tolerant, this virus of doubt, which is already sweeping the church, is just going to sweep it more. So there's that. And then there's, you know, just giving up power. It's really hard to do that. And why would they do that? You know, it's impossible to get a man to see a point of view when his livelihood depends on not seeing it. And I think they know that if they became Community of Christ, they'd see tithing receipts tank. They would see, you know, butts and seats tank. They would see, it's not like the progressives and liberals would all go, oh, okay, I'll stay now. So many of us, or, you know, those people would just go, yeah, well, you were making this up all along, and now you've confirmed that you're all frauds. I'm not staying for this. And I'm just painting, as someone who's been doing this a few more years longer than you, I'm just painting like I'm being candid and vulnerable about when I get angry, when I get frustrated, when I lose my patience and cool, when I'm less diplomatic. Part of that is just having my heart broken so many times for so many years.
No doubt. So I have a couple observations. Yeah. Who in their right mind would frickin' give up a job at Microsoft to go back to school and do this? Did someone force you to do that? Was it the divine? What was it?
I thought it was divine at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, call it whatever you want. No one hoped that into being. That's how it works. And institutional and personal experiences, what I'd suggest is that everything that you said is absolutely accurate. But if enough of those human beings go through an awakening and a divine absence, and they transition into a relationship with the divine instead of with the priesthood and the narrative, then they won't care, just like you didn't care. And they'll do what's right, even if it means they're going to lose the conservatives. So right now, I think you're right. Like, they're losing, I think we visited about this, speculated that where the church is pretty orthodox, they're probably losing about 1% to 3% of active believing members per year, of ward council type people that are stumbling across the essays, or they're going into faith crisis. So, if you go to a ward in Logan and the ward has 500 members, 5 to 15 members a year are probably going through a faith transition. And you don't see it all because they're not all like reading the CS letter and resigning. A lot of them are still in the pews as non-believers. But I think about 1% to 3% a year. You've mentioned that that's probably anecdotally, So over a period of 10 years, if 5 million members become 4 million active members, there's some pressure there. But the other thing is, I talk about earlier about how our minds work and how our brains work. And with confirmation bias, we can't see the Honda Accords unless we drove one or own one. And the brethren, my perception, again, we're just totally speculating here, but my perception is that in their minds, the only reason they could foresee leaving or losing faith is if they believed that the other brethren were in apostasy. So in their confirmation bias, the only thing they can see is we need to fear the conservatives because they would never leave over us, right? And so they can't even see us. We're the Honda Accords, and they can't even see us. And they're afraid if they move too fast and they, because the inside information is supposedly there is a coordinated plan to over time refer to the Book of Mormon as a revelation. They're already referring...
Not as a translation.
Not as a translation, and they'll stop talking about the plates, and they'll start talking more about the seer stones. And that 10 years from now, you could be in a BYU religion class and believe that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century revelation or creation that is non-historical, and it would be an accepted valid point. Like there is supposedly a strategic plan to get to that, and the Orthodox apologists would totally disagree with that. But it seems to be the direction we're going. I mean, if just the Orthodox apologists would just accept that the Jewish origin myths are origin myths, so that means it's all figurative, right? Or a lot more of it than they would want to accept. That's the direction that we're going. That people can experience divinity in their participation, and there are stories like the woman taken in adultery in the Book of Mormon that are beautiful, right? And people can experience a sense of spirituality with that, and so forth. So there is that, but my sense is that from their confirmation bias, they can only see physically what would cause them to leave, but they're being stretched. And that's why you're getting these bifurcated messages where Elder Gay gives this amazing talk that I've listened to 5 times about how God called him, almost reprimanded him when he was giving his sister a blessing, that he needed to see her the way God saw her instead of the constructs that he saw her through. And then on the other end, you get the Renlund's talk and the Corbridge talk, right? You get these... And sometimes they're the same person giving these bifurcated messages. And that's what happens. That's what happens when creative destruction is happening to institutions and political parties and all of that.
Yeah. And it may be we're going through creative destruction. It may be...
I think so.
It may be. And it may be this has always been true, which is why you would get the Hugh B. Brown talks and you would get the Lowell Benions or the Lennon Arringtons.
It's all evidence of creative destruction from the margins.
I guess what I'm talking about is kind of
that it's not going to make a difference.
What difference ends up getting made? And that's,
I don't know.
I mean, we think about that all the time.
Yeah.
And this goes to something else. So, and again, people can stop listening if they want, but I'm just talking to Anthony now as a friend. So another topic that's really interesting to me is this sort of topic of like being gracious or graceful.
Yeah.
Like when, there was this funny quote that someone said once as Bill Reel is, John Dehlin once was, and as John Dehlin is, Bill Reel may become. And this was back when Bill Reel was really being faith-seeking understanding.
To make it work. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And believe it or not, before for many, many years, I was giving the Why I Stay talk at Sunstone. Yep. I was creating Stay LDS, and I was really criticized by everybody for walking that line of trying to expose people to doubts, or at least to the factual evidence, but also trying to be thoughtful and diplomatic and gracious and kind. And, this is just me being vulnerable, and you probably already know this from listening, but when you see all the LGBT depression and suicide, all the families torn apart, times 14 years, you know what I mean? Or 20 years, depending on how you're counting, you start to really get, you start to feel like these guys aren't listening. These guys have so much hubris, and being patient and graceful and gracious and diplomatic isn't moving the needle. And then you talk about someone like a new name Noah.
Yeah.
He moved the needle.
Yeah, he did.
Right?
Sam Young moved the needle.
Sam Young, and he wasn't...
Kate Kelly moved the needle.
Yeah.
Bill Reel is moving the needle. You move the needle. Yep.
And so something that's always hard for me whenever, let's just say Patrick Mason or Spencer Fluman or Thomas McConkie or Terrell and Fiona Givens or Richard Bushman or whoever, pick any person, Maxine Hanks, the people will talk about, oh, they're so angry, or they're harsh, or they're not gracious, or they're negative, or they're critical, or whatever it is, talking about any of these people that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
I'm always torn between like, yeah, but they're the ones that move the needle. And so I'm always torn between beating myself up. Oh, that Facebook post was a little harsh, or oh, that my tone wasn't quite right in that interview that I did, or oh man, Anthony's so poised and gracious. Man, I wish I could be like Anthony, or oh, Thomas McConkie. Everybody loves Thomas McConkie, and oh, he's so graceful and gracious. But I ask myself what moves the needle, and I don't say that saying that I really know, because I think we're all speculating.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn or anyone's horn, because I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
But we're all kind of guessing at this, and it just seems like what moves the needle is like massive awareness and massive negative public, publicity, and just really hard-edged, direct action. That's what that appears to be. After doing this for 14 to 20 years and trying to study the past 30 or 40 years, it seems like that's what moves the needle. And then sometimes it's hard to feel like there's this kind of like noble, intellectual, progressive class, kind of this elitist Mormon studies kind of class that looks down on all the change makers as like lesser than, pedestrian, negative, kind of persona non grata, when it seems like those are the people that really are moving the needle. That's hard. And I don't know if I'm imagining that or if that's really going on.
I would say it would, and I do have some thoughts about this.
Yeah, I want to hear. Thank you for letting me express it.
Yes. So think about Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle says a lot of pain that we experience in our life is our attachment to form, or our attachment to our egoic voice or our identity, and suffering with regard to things that we can't control. So Eckhart Tolle would say, while there's value in listening to that, that's not who we are, and it's not helpful to experience suffering based on that. What we should do is listen to our inner voice and consciousness and trust that that's what we should do. And so I don't have...
Is there a difference between personal spiritual growth and effective action that changes an institution?
So Eckhart Tolle would say, listening to your inner voice or your consciousness or your being doesn't mean you don't go to work. So Lindsay Hansen Park can do what she's doing out of her listening to her inner voice, as opposed to feeling that she should do that, or I'm failing if I don't do that, or I should feel shame if I don't do that, because it's been programmed to me that if something's broken, I'm supposed to fix it and it's my responsibility. She could be doing these amazing things that she's doing, and we could ask her about it. I'll ask her about it. Because in those quiet moments, when she quiets her egoic voice and listens to her inner consciousness, her connection to the divine or God or whatever it is that you want to call it, that it leads her to do, this is where you belong now. And so the old me might have thought that this was maybe a cop-out, you know, you have skills, you should get in there, you should like tear out down everybody's shelves, you know, you should do all these kinds of things. And I've kind of reconciled that people are going to unpack.
And I'm not arguing for that, by the way.
I know you're not.
I don't want that to be a straw man.
Right. Yeah. People are going to unpack their shelves when they're ready. The church is going to change when 3-4 of the senior hierarchy and control hit stage 5 faith. That's when it's going to change. My perception is David Bednar would run it into the ground with small f and fundamentalism, even if there are only 2 million members, unless he goes through a faith crisis. So that's totally beyond my control. Just like I can't control, you know, if Elder Ballard is going to unpack his shelves and go through a faith transition and realize that Moses isn't a real person or Abraham's not a real person. Like, I can't do anything about that. Either that's going to happen or it's not. And my identity is not going to be based on that. But what feeds me is listening to my inner voice that says, I need to be here right now with you, and I needed to be at Sunstone last week, and I need to be doing the things that I'm doing that participate in the lives of others. And I can strategize about these other things, and I can sit with people and say, we can do this and we can do that. But in the end, it's not helpful for me to get all upset about something that I can't control or that I don't have direct influence over. And my motivation shouldn't be based on shoulds or shame or scripted narrative voices. It should be based on my inner voice.
Yeah, and I love all that language. So just to ask it a different way, the church's policies for interviewing children changed because Sam Young made some very big direct actions that were viewed as very offensive and attacking of the church. The church became more sensitive to women's issues when Kate Kelly spoke very strongly and loudly, organized marches, and went at the church for how it treats women. New Name Noah did his thing. Yep. You know, several people have been involved in trying to help the church see what's wrong about its LGBTQ policies, yeah. and ultimately leading to them rescinding the November 2015 policy. Yeah, the essays were a result of very specific and direct and kind of sometimes sharp-elbowed actions, and though sometimes being a warrior, and I don't want to, you know. You said something earlier that was basically everyone's got their role to play.
So if Sam Young was sitting right here, I don't know if he's watching, Sam, but if we were to ask you in the quiet moments, did you do what you felt called to do? Not out of shame or should, but in your heart, you knew that you needed to protect the children. I guess my bet is he'd probably say yes.
Who of us is not going to say that?
I don't know. I think in a moment of vulnerability, Sam would be honest and say, no, I did this because I was programmed that I was the protector, and I did it because I felt like I should, and I would feel guilty or shamed if I didn't. I don't know. I mean, maybe he did for those reasons.
You don't think it's just as simple as he was outraged by the harm being done and he wanted to help protect people?
So he could have been an Enneagram 8 or whatever, the social justice warrior one. You know, it could be how he's designed. It could be because he saw things that he didn't see before, because he saw outside of his paradigm, because his paradigm's crumbled. It could be any number of things. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't be gladiators. Absolutely not. Be a gladiator. But do it not out of shame and guilt and perfectionism. Do it because that is what feeds you. So I don't know if Mike does what he does out of processing trauma or wounding that he's seen, you know, sitting with people whose kids have committed suicide. I don't know if that's what drives Mike. I don't know. I haven't sit with him in that. I think that some of it is, you know, in his story with you, he shared about the message of that kid that was going to commit suicide if he didn't watch that video. That leads me to believe that there's some of what Mike does that it's not all out of spite.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what I'm saying.
And so I don't know if we're talking past each other. I don't think we are. I think you kind of get what I'm saying, and I certainly get what you're saying. You know, I shared earlier in the interview that when I sit down with somebody, I'm a financial planner, so I'm all about planning for the future and, you know, fixing problems and everything. And I sit down with somebody and I say, you know, if we were having, in this conversation, I would say, if we were having this conversation 3 years from now, so in 2022, and we were looking back to today, what needs to have happened in our life for us to feel happy with our progress with regard to these issues? And then specifically, what dangers need to be eliminated, and then determine what of those dangers do we have control over and which ones don't we? What opportunities need to be captured, and what do we have control over, and what strengths, what do we have going for us that we need to focus and follow through on? And I would have a lot of answers for that. So I would say we need active believing members of the church to love a gay person, because there's nothing that opens someone's heart more to nuance than loving a gay person. So let's give them opportunities. Let's invite them to the Pride Parade. Let's take them to Encircle. Let's support Lisa's organization. Let's do all of these things, and that'll make a difference. You know, that's an opportunity. These small groups, home church, you know, whatever it's going to, Mormon spectrum, these are all things that are going to make a difference. So we can be intentional in this. But we do need to recognize what we have control over and what we don't, and then focus on the things that we have control over. Anyway,
yeah,
I think maybe we're speaking past each other a little bit.
Maybe, and I'll just summarize. I think that because I brought you on because of your gracefulness and graciousness, and I always like to kind of like look at both sides. Yep. And so as I reflect on the many times I lack gracefulness and graciousness, yeah, two things. I'm aware of how hard I've found it to be to actually make tangible, meaningful change in the church, which I think we have. Yeah. And to do it gracefully and graciously. It's super hard to instigate change in this church. Yeah. It's really super extra, really hard to do it graciously and gracefully. And so that's part one. And part two is sometimes I'm frustrated by, groups of people that sometimes you may associate with, and that, kind of the Mormon studies, Mormon intellectual, liberal, progressive, believing Mormon crowd, who look down on many of the change, they kind of look down their noses at many of the change agents, who were the very ones that really made the sacrifices that in many ways led to the meaningful change. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think there's an opportunity there, So how I'm built as an extrovert and how I process things and how I'm expressing myself post-grief, although I'm sure I'll find more things to grieve, that fits for my local Mormon spectrum group than playing to your strengths, right? So I need to play to my strengths, and you're playing to your strengths, right?
I don't know. Sometimes I feel really inadequate and guilty and like insecure. So I don't know.
Listen to Eckhart Tolle again. That's your ego. That has nothing like, anyway, listen to Eckhart Tolle again. So I play to my strengths. You play to your strengths. I think it's I think we're all in this together. And I think, that I can sit down with Maxine and others, and I don't think Maxine looks down at the change agents. At least I haven't got that perception.
She's been very generous to me.
But I can sit down with Spencer Fluman or Brian Hoglett or others, or Robin Jensen or Jackson Washburn or Tarek LaCour or, others. Jeff Lindsay wouldn't sit down with me, but, and I can have tender conversations with them and say, look, can you trust, back to those 5 things, like, these are my boundaries. Listen to my story. Let's share spiritual languages. Trust that my journey could be different than yours, and let me know what your boundaries are. And having those kinds of conversations. So I have a good friend in St. George area who is a black and white fair Mormon apologist, and he's my friend. And he disagrees with my reconciliations, but we can find some commonality, and I think that's putting in the work. I mean, I think that's what Lindsay's doing too. So, yeah, I mean.
Do you connect emotionally with what I'm saying?
I absolutely 100% connect with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got some feedback. I did a post and like, what do you want me to talk about? And I got some feedback that want me to say things that burn it down, and maybe for some people, my talk about Jewish origin myths is the equivalent of burning it down. I don't know. I feel very comfortable with what I'm doing, and a year from now, it might be different. So that's where I am now.
Well, I love what you're doing, and that's why I brought you on. And I love what you said about maybe we all have a role to play.
Yes, I believe that.
But it's hard. It's hard when we're doing different things sometimes to not only see the world through kind of our lens, depending on our perspective. Okay, bunch of questions. You ready?
Go for it.
So how do you look back now? You mentioned, I think you've already answered this. You talked about when you felt the miracle of the Jiffy Lube miracle that you mentioned, when you mentioned the rustling of noise at the temple.
In my patriarchal blessing.
In your patriarchal blessing, when you mentioned the temple veil with Scott. A lot of our listeners always want to know how you reinterpret those things now. Do you leave room for them still to be divine miracles, or do you reinterpret them in more secular ways?
Well, I think serendipity, like the oil in the car, that happens everywhere. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think there's an interventionist God being that made our car run with no oil so I could have a testimony, I don't believe that. So I don't know, and I'm okay not knowing what that is. With things like my deceased friend Scott standing next to me at the veil in the temple, I don't know. I do think that, like I mentioned, I think if Joseph Smith was a Muslim and believed in the literal historicity of the Quran, he would have filtered or interpreted his experiences through that construct, and the Book of Mormon would have been about a different tribe. And with that reconciliation, I would say that many of my spiritual experiences in the past, I think what I was doing was filtering those experiences through the constructs that meant something to me. So whether Scott or his consciousness or spirit were standing next to me, or whether in an intense sense of spiritual connection and emotion with my dear friend, his widow, standing at the veil. And the only way I could filter that was through the construct that I was acting vicariously for him. You know, I don't know, because I don't know how much of that experience was me filtering my experience through the constructs that I had. So I don't know. I hope that our consciousness continues, but I don't know. And that's okay.
You're okay not knowing. Some people come to me sort of with almost panic attacks, realizing they're going to die, especially if they have some near-death experience or a cancer diagnosis. All of a sudden, they're like, yeah, when I left the church, I was secular and I was fine, not knowing about the afterlife and suspending judgment or even just being an atheist. Yeah. Sometimes I've seen some clients get triggered into literal regular panic attacks when they start thinking about an imminent death.
Yeah.
Do you ever have those moments?
So I unpacked that. Yeah. Anne, I can't remember Anne's last name, but she was married to Carl Sagan, I think. She wrote something, and whenever this comes up, I'll like search online for her quote, Carl Sagan's widow's comment. And I feel embarrassed for not knowing her last name. But she has this quote where she says, people asked if in the final moments, if Carl became a believer as he faced his imminent death. And basically what she says in this quote, and I encourage your listeners to Google it and look it up because it's pretty impactful. She said, no, she said, what we sat with is the miracle, you know, in this small blue dot and all of this history and everything that happened, that we had the moments that we had together and they were precious. And she said, I expressed that I don't think I'll ever see him again, but I'm so grateful for what I have. Another way of parsing that is to say, let's say in life, we're watching a movie, and it's the most amazing movie, and we're loving the movie, but we know the movie's going to end because it's a movie. Does that make you want to get up and walk out of the movie because you know it's going to end? Or do you want to see what's going to happen next? Right? So this life is going to end. I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen after it ends. But the current present moment is pretty amazing. And I don't want to leave it because I want to see what happens next. So those are some constructs that have been helpful for me.
Have you tried to have communication with the divine again? You talked about that communication stopping all of a sudden. And have you found a way to reconnect, get that connection going again? Have you given up trying?
I would say for at least a year, I continued to pray, even as someone in divine absence that had lost literal belief in the traditional Mormon way. Now my perception is that a lot of my sense of prayer has value in terms of gratitude or devotion or expressing my sense of gratitude for the opportunity to participate to, I don't know, a greater consciousness. And maybe it's only for me, I don't know. But I experience the same, there are studies that have been done that people in a meditative experience have the same brain activity as when they're praying. So physiologically, it's the same thing. So if you're listening to a violin solo and it's bringing you totally into the present, or if you're playing with your dog and it brings you totally into the present, or if you're meditating or whatnot, physiologically, brain activity, fMRI machine kind of stuff, the same thing is happening that's happening in prayer. Now, if your prayer constructs are about asking God something like he's a vending machine versus expressing gratitude or desire or stuff like that, that's probably going to be a different experience of prayer. But in any event, so I'm still in the struggle with that. There's a recent Liturgist podcast episode about prayer that I found very beautiful. And anyone that is struggling with the idea of prayer, I'd encourage that they go to that Liturgist podcast episode about prayer. And there's another one about God that's somewhat recent.
Thank you for that. Do you ever feel guilt or sadness about leaving the church knowing that it helped your family so much? That it was such a positive and incredibly meaningful part of helping your family kind of transcend out of poverty and help you get to a place of great privilege? Did you ever during your faith crisis kind of go, man, how can I do this? How can I do this to the legacy of my parents? How can I do this after all the church has done for me?
Absolutely. I did. Yeah, when I was in the grieving process and the deconstruction process, I felt like I needed to fix it, and I felt guilty, and I was grieving the constructs of my spiritual experiences, and I had a conversation with my sister. I don't know if she'll be comfortable with me sharing this. I think she'll be fine. When I told her I had lost belief, she's very active believing. She asked, well, what about that day you gave me a blessing about this, that, and the other, and it was so helpful, and we had this very close spiritual experience together. And I said, that is still a very treasured experience to me. I just don't interpret it the same way that I used to. I think there's divinity in the church, and the divinity is in the people. And I don't think what I'm doing now in any way depreciates those amazing things that my youth leaders and other leaders of the church did for me as a youth and for my family. I don't think it depreciates that at all.
What about the argument of not walking away out of loyalty to what the church did for you and your family?
So, in our Sunstone presentation with Sarah and Gina this year, we talked about post-Orthodox growth and spirituality, and we did an exercise where we looked at a list of personal and spiritual values. Excuse me. And part of the exercise was to quickly identify your top 3 and then recognize spiritual practices related to your top 3 are what are going to feed you, and realize that if you're married to someone or you have relationships that have other top values, that sometimes there can be differentiation in that. So my values of integrity and transparency supersede my value of loyalty. Whereas I have friends in the church that their value of loyalty supersedes their value of integrity and transparency.
Kind of the Jonathan Haidt values reconciliation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So that's what keeps you from, many will say, well, I stay to help. I stay to help the church get better. You're saying your values balance.
If that is your value,
do it. But that's why you can't do it.
I can't do it.
Or don't want to do it.
Yeah, because my values are different.
Yeah.
My values include transparency. It includes advocating for people on the margins, and integrity, and those kinds of things would cause dissonance for my friends in the church if I participated in the church according to my values.
Yeah.
So I don't want to hurt my friends.
Yeah, I relate to that. I got to the point where if I'm going to go to church, I have to be quiet because I'm just disrupting everyone's church experience. And that's not kind. I value being kind.
Yeah, I have friends that do that and go to church, and then they go to another church so they can be spiritually fed. Yeah. So they do 2 churches.
That's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always listen to people's faith narratives from the viewpoint of an Orthodox believer, and also from the framework of sort of the stereotypes about why people leave. And so I just want to, as an Orthodox believer, throw back a few of those tropes and have you answer them.
Go.
So one would be, you left because you had a brittle, unrealistic, literalistic faith that, you expected too much of the scriptures, you expected too much of the brethren, all this literalism stuff. There's a lot of people that never took it too literally, never took it too seriously, never viewed the church as like the one and only true church, never viewed prophets as perfect or, near perfect. So it's on you that you had just such a brittle, literalistic faith. What would you say to that?
Sure. It was brittle. I got it from Benson, McConkie, Hinckley, and Packer. I got it from the scriptures, the way they represent themselves. And I got it for, that's what fed me and that's what made me thrive in the church, was based on that. And now I'm thriving in different ways. But my dear friend, Dick Osler, Papa Osler, it's pretty painful, you know who he is. It's pretty painful for him, at least that's what he's expressed when people leave. But he actually trusts that people thrive outside too. And so he grieves the loss. So I think if I'm on the outside practicing good and metaphorically and physically offering my hand and bringing people into shared spiritual languages and experiences, that will ease some of their concerns about those things.
Excellent. Beautiful. Okay. Next one. You were offended. You lost money with your stake president. Your son was bullied, as a gay kid in the church. And then ultimately your son came out as gay. So, you were either offended or you get a pass because your son was gay. And that's kind of why you left the church.
Yeah. So I didn't lose money with my stake president, but, because that project actually has gone well.
Oh, okay. Good. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I left because I was offended. I hate that Sunday school lesson, and I taught that at least twice, because there wasn't a seat in the pew in the Kirtland dedicatory thing or a misspelled name.
Milk stripping.
Or milk strippings, yeah, Thomas Marsh, yeah. So, if someone bases their membership and belief and testimony in the church on not being offended among a bunch of other human beings, that's pretty brittle construct. And if people think that the only reason that I would leave is because I have been offended, that's a pretty brittle construct too. And they don't know who I am. So, no, I didn't leave because I was offended. No.
There's always the classic kind of apologetic, Fawn Brody's book's been out since 1945. The Tanners have been out since the 60s and beyond. Russell M. Nelson mentioned the peepstone in the hat in 82 or whatever in the Ensign.
Sure.
People have known about Joseph's polygamy since the 1800s. Like, you didn't know the church history because you didn't do what others have done to learn it. Mm-hmm. And so by your own neglect of actually learning the real history, you were susceptible to feeling lied to and betrayed, when in reality the church, you could find, if you wanted to find it, you could for decades and decades.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's super unhelpful for my friends that are apologists. That is not helpful.
Is your blood pressure rising
to
as I ask you these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I had some pretty polemic conversations with traditional apologists about those kinds of things, and explained that, I did what I was taught to do. I stayed in the correlated curriculum. I stayed in the mainstream of the church. If they would have posted the text of the different versions of the First Vision in Truth Restored or Our Heritage, I would have read them. Absolutely, I would have read them. And I've even recently gotten an argument with people saying that the text of the different versions of the First Vision should be in saints. And they're like, no, it's a narrative history and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, no, that's not what transparency looks like. And they're like, you're trying to hold the church to the same level of transparency that you have to operate with as a financial advisor. And that's not how history works, and so forth. And it's kind of, we go back and forth. I would say that in the end, people don't leave church over the history. They don't lose belief over the history. All that does is bring them to a place to unpack the messiness. And so, I was exposed to Book of Abraham in like 2001.
Right.
And I wasn't ready to unpack it, Or I could go back to them and say, do you know that the Jewish origin myths are myths and that Abraham's not a real person? Because the information's out there.
Right.
So it's just not helpful to do that. That shames people. That doesn't help people. Remember, the number 2 thing to minister to people in faith crisis or transition is to listen to their story and trust their experience, and don't tell them it's wrong.
Right.
So.
Yeah. People only are open to learning when they're ready.
When they're ready.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's harmful to blame people who feel victimized. So that's why I'm bringing this up. So
I just can't even imagine or understand how someone could actually believe that would be helpful for someone to reconnect to God, to browbeat them and blame them and shame them and say, you must have not been very faithful or curious about this faith that you paid all this money to and spent all this time with. Like, I don't understand how anyone could think that could be helpful or pastoral in any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
But they do it. So.
This is just, what about the fact that you left because your son was gay?
No, I didn't leave. My son's gay and my wife's still in the church. Right. So that.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
This is just a weird question, and this is like multiverse. This is Spider-Man multiverse stuff.
Perfect.
If you had been called as a mission president or a stake president before you really had your crisis of faith, do you think that could have kind of locked you in where you wouldn't be where you are now? Once the trappings of like the higher office, once you assume the kind of trappings of the higher offices.
So this is a tender conversation because one of my dearest friends went through his faith deconstruction while he was serving in a stake presidency. And he had served as bishop twice. You know who it is. And he went through a faith deconstruction while he was in a stake presidency, recognizing that he had neglected his family and harmed his family by neglecting them by all of his service for more than 20 years. And that was crushing to my dear friend. I just can't even comprehend or imagine, because there are things that happen in my life that I can navigate for. But to go through a faith crisis, realizing that you've been serving in positions where you neglected your family for the church, he deserves to be angry as long as he wants to be angry, Or my friends who have lost a loved one to suicide, or a gay child or something. Like you live in that as long as you need to in the anger stages. I would say how I'm built, I would have been just like my friend. If I was a branch president of that Spanish-speaking branch for our stake, or if I was in the stake presidency, or if I was a bishop, if I would have stumbled across this stuff because how I am built, it would have just been more painful, but the result would have been the same. That's just how I'm built.
Yeah. Sometimes I've been meeting with a lot of stake currently serving bishops, and even currently serving stake presidents or former stake presidents and bishops. And sometimes getting called in a higher office actually accelerates
their faith crisis.
Yeah. And we've interviewed a lot of bishops where they lost their faith because they were called as bishop or stake president, or in Hans Mattsson's case, area authority.
Those are such tender conversations.
Yeah. I'm getting like one a week.
I feel
a missionary who's serving their mission, a bishop who's currently bishop. It's getting crazy.
Well, they have people in their congregations that are going through this, and then they try to do more than the pastoral thing. They try to become apologists, and then they understand that it crashes their shelves and it doesn't add up.
And that's a real dilemma for the church. I don't know how I would recommend that they deal with that.
We need 3 members of the Quorum of the 15 to go through a faith crisis, and then we can fix it.
All right. Did you guys hear that, church headquarters? We're ordering 3
Yeah.
we're requesting the faith crisis of 3 apostles.
How about Ballard?
Preferably senior
Ballard,
apostles.
Holland, and Uchtdorf.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let's get them into stage 5 faith. And then by the time that Nelson and Oakes die.
Right.
So it takes time to go through this.
This is called Kremlin watching.
We have a deadline.
Hi, John Hamer.
Yeah, we have a deadline.
This is Kremlin watching.
Get through faith crisis so that you can have a female priesthood and you can unpack the overloaded truth cart, and Maxine Hanks and Fiona Givens can be apostles, and and then within a generation we can fix the non-literalism and accept that Abraham's not a real person and all of that stuff.
And then unicorns and rainbows and jelly beans will dance together.
Well, yeah.
My Little Pony and Strawberry Shortcake.
Reza asks,
I'm just joking.
No, but seriously though,
I love the optimism. We need it. We need optimism.
They're all symbols. Reza Aslan talks about taking his 2 twin sons to different faith traditions. He's a Sufi Muslim and his wife's an evangelical Christian, and he has one 7-year-old twin who decided he wants to be a Jew, and the other 7-year-old twin went to kind of Hinduism service and realized that there's purple elephants that like shoot arrows. And he's like, this is a religion? I'm in with that. So not quite unicorns, but they're all symbols. No,
it's true. And the church is going to change. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
It's changing.
And maybe it will happen in my lifetime. I don't know. I mean, but my study of institutional and economic theory and institutional theory and business and so forth, and looking at the church as an institution, it has to go through a creative destruction process, and we can either wait for Jackson Washburn's generation to be in the senior leadership, or we can have, it's not going to change because the way the tradition hierarchy works unless there's 2 or 3 of the very most senior apostles that go to get to stage 5 faith.
Did you ever consider allowing them to hold a disciplinary court on you? You said that you didn't want to put your friends through that.
Yeah.
Is that why you didn't do it?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't want to put my friends in faith crisis. Like if they want to unpack their shelves, they can unpack their shelves, and they can come to our Mormon Spectrum group and we'll support them. But I didn't want to put them through that. Like I love these men. I served with them. I still love these men.
Sure.
So.
Some would say the church is already changing. All the Russell and Nelson changes with the shortening the mission of, what have they done? The allowing missionaries to call home, shortening church service to 2 hours, the temple ceremony changes. There's a lot of really significant, rolling back the November 2015 policy. Some would say we're on the fast track to becoming Community of Christ. Or just like Spencer Fluman in the Maxwell Institute and Phil Barlow being hired into the Maxwell Institute and Daniel Peterson getting jettisoned and Rough Stone Rolling and the essays and that there are a lot of people that say this is the most aggressive, high velocity change the Mormon church has probably ever been through. Even allowing allowing weddings, before the sealings without a year wait. Like those are all things we all prayed for decades.
So if you want to attribute the divine to some of that, that's okay. But a lot of it's not divine. So the church hasn't been retaining youth, and they have for years they've had a demographic mismatch between males and females because more males would leave the church in between their mission. And so if you looked at active 25-year-old singles in the church, there was a demographic mismatch. There were too many women for men, so I guess you could bring back polygamy or something, right? But it was a problem. And so the brethren were looking at this, and they said, what do we do so that we lose fewer of our youth during that gap year between graduation and a mission? And so they thought, we'll lower the mission age so that we lose fewer of our youth. We'll give them more spiritual experiences. The construct is that means it's true, and we'll have greater retention. But that's not what's happening. Jana Reese's statistics show that 1/3 of those missionaries are coming home early. They should have delayed the mission age, not reduced the mission age, because of the demographic. Jonathan Haidt's talked about this, of today's youth are about 5 years less mature than older generations were at their same age, for a number of different reasons socially. And so they're sending kids on missions today that are about as mature as, our generation was at maybe when they were 15 or 16, and they're like 18, and they have never been away from home. They've never had to be totally self-reliant, and they're not used to it, and they're not able to handle that. And so it was a huge mistake, a huge blunder to lower the mission age. It's been a disaster. It's caused trauma. And so what they're doing, instead of...
Even Jackson Washburn comes home early from his mission.
Yeah, and that's his story to tell.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's talking...
But yeah. And so, even Jackson came over, and he's like one of the most mature people that age who I know.
Intelligent,
right.
wise.
Absolutely.
Graceful, gracious.
Absolutely.
Except when he's being a little bit of a...
he's working it out. Give him some time.
I know. Compared to me when I was his age.
Oh, yeah. So they're causing a problem.
I was going to say gadfly, by the way. I'll finish the sentence.
Okay.
Sometimes he's a little bit of a gadfly.
Okay.
But he's amazing. He's lovely. Brilliant.
I love that young man. Yeah. Anything I can do to support him, I would.
Yeah.
And I have, and I will. I would say lowering the mission age was a huge mistake. There's nothing divine about it. It was trying to retain youth. It's totally backfiring on them, so that what they're doing now is they're going to do service missions, which is going to create an othered experience, because when you're female and you're going to look for a husband, you want an RM who served a proselyting mission, because that meant that they were more faithful than those that went on a service mission. It's a total disaster. It's just an absolute total disaster. 2-hour church. They're dividing stakes to smaller units, and they're creating wards with fewer members in it because the church is shrinking, and so part of reducing church is to increase retention, and part of it is that they can fit more wards in a building. That has nothing to do with the divine. That's totally an institutional strategic thing. Rewording the words in the temple for women. If you look at the words before and the words after, it says the same thing. They just reworded it. So whether your women's ears are anointed to hear the counsel of their husband, or whether it's to hear the voice of the Lord, it's the same thing. Or whether they're covenanting to heed the counsel, of their husband versus something with the new and everlasting covenant or something like. It's the same thing. The words and the rewording in the temple are the same thing. They didn't change anything. The execution penalty is still there. You just don't pantomime the whole thing. So they haven't changed anything. So none of that.
A lot of progressive liberal Mormon women feel like they've made changes that really affect how women are treated and talked about in the ceremony.
So I wouldn't negate that experience, and there is some. So like Eve speaks more, right?
The hearken thing, right?
Yeah. And so there is that.
That's big. Come on.
Okay, I'll give you that. So, I mean, you have to study the foundational, where the temple came about and why men and women sit apart and why men know the new name and the women don't. And you have to realize that it's all a Section 132 thing. It's all about polygamy. It's all about this belief that Freemasonry is ancient instead of something that was developed in the 15 to 1700s. And I'm not going to I'm not going to diminish other people's experience. If there are women that are totally fed in that, I love that. If my wife is fed in that, I totally love that. But I just share my perspective, my experience, my opinion is I don't think that they materially changed anything.
You're saying it's lipstick on a...
They just reworded the same animal thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you ever, and this is, I almost know the answer because, you're being gracious and graceful. Do you ever get frustrated with the neo-apologists, as I call them, with the Masons, the Flumans, the Bushmans, the Gibbons, that there's if I've had to distill my concerns, it's that there's a lack of willingness to truly hold the institutional church accountable for the things that it's done wrong, the way that it's deceived people, the way it's harmed people. They want to kind of not go there because they don't want to damage their ability to make change within or hurt their capital. And then there's still an allegiance ultimately to tithing and to loyalty to the brethren and to, to an institution that some would say is built on deception and sometimes harming people, even though it's done a lot of good. So have you ever experienced frustration with neo-apologists in any material way, or do you see them as just total allies in the cause?
So this is a both and answer.
Okay.
So my frustration with the neo-apologists is when they use words that they attribute a totally different meaning to.
Like translate?
Yes. That's an example. When they use words or the word true, right? True can mean accurately what it's represented to be, or true can mean that it has utility. Like a painting could be true or a song could be true, right? It can have a different meaning. And so they'll talk about the Book of Mormon being true because it has utility. And they know that the typical member, what Jeremy calls a chapel Mormon, believe that they're saying that the Book of Mormon is accurately what it represents itself to be. And so my frustration with the neo-apologists is when they use words or symbols and they know they're attributing a different meaning to that word, and they're using it with traditional believers without clarifying that they're attributing a totally different meaning to that word. And so I do experience a fair amount of frustration with that. On the other hand, my heart goes out to them. Like, I didn't read it because I wasn't going to read it. But Jeff Lindsay's smackdown of Brian Hoglid, that's disgraceful. I mean, that is embarrassing, what Jeff Lindsay did to Brian Hoglid. I mean, there's no divinity in what he did. And
Brian Hoglid's a BYU professor who has been open about his changing views on the Book of Abraham and its authenticity, and in a very courageous act, working for the Maxwell Institute.
Yeah,
and I didn't read, but it doesn't surprise me. So Jeff Lindsay, gobsmacked him.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure Peterson
and the Mormon Interpreter has done, printed takedown essays on David Bokovoy and on the Gibbons.
Other people.
And right. And so, so my heart goes out to these neo-apologists that are trying to make space and trying to help people who experience a sense of the divine in their participation in the church, who have these super well-funded right-wing conservatives that are just doing smackdown. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Jim Bennett, even though I come to a lot of different reconciliations than he does on things. And I went to his session to support him at Sunstone. And afterwards I told him, I said, Jim, my heart goes out to you because my sense is that it's only a matter of time before a right-wing takedown piece is made on you.
And who's Jim Bennett?
Jim Bennett is Bob Bennett's son. He did a series.
He's the one who did the thing with Bill Reel.
Yeah.
Where they debated the CES letter.
Yeah, and he shared his reconciliations with regard to fallibility of prophets and all this kind of stuff, and probably a pretty helpful reconciliation for somebody that's trying to do a nuanced middle way. And I respect Jim Bennett. His sarcasm comes across as cruelty for people that don't realize that it's just sarcasm. But I told him, I said, I really respect the work that you're doing, but I'll stand with you when the right wing does a takedown on you, because, I think it's not going to be fair. And he's like, oh, I know those guys. That'll never happen to me. And I'm like, they knew Brian Hoglid, and the Givens and David Bokovoy, they're still caught in their brittle constructs.
But they're losing, aren't they kind of losing their credibility over time? Aren't they kind of being marginal? I mean, as Fluman and Barlow and Givens are all hired into the Maxwell Institute, and they're the ones getting the Deseret book contracts now. They're the ones who are creating content for the Maxwell Institute that's really that's really marketing a progressive, nuanced form of Mormonism at BYU.
Yeah.
That's Saudi Arabia or, the Medina, if not the Mecca of Mormonism.
Roger Terry, a BYU professor, did a 2-part essay and dialogue last year about the restoration of the priesthood and how the meaning that we attribute to priesthood has nothing to do with history. It's not a thing. And he's a BYU professor.
Right. Aren't these classic apologists kind of losing their relevance and just kind of flailing as their respect and power kind of disappears? Or no?
They're heavily funded.
Yeah, they are.
And they're funded through shell ways from the church too, like Saints Unscripted or the 3 Mormon ones.
Book of Mormon. What's the website?
Book of Mormon Central.
Book of Mormon Central.
Yeah, they're funded from the church.
Also, let's not forget the More Good Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All those nonprofits.
Yeah. So in institutional creative destruction, when companies lose innovation, this is what happens. So what's happening is exactly what's supposed to happen. It's what happens. It's messy.
Yeah, it is.
It's evolution.
It is.
Yeah.
I really want to have you. I have to take a call right now from somebody who is in a really bad spot. So I have to kind of wrap up, even though I want to keep going. Really quick, I'll fire around like 15-second answers.
Go.
Do you go to church with your wife ever?
Yes.
To just kind of support
her? Not to support her because she doesn't want me to go if I'm going to be wounded. But I'll go to a funeral with her. I'll go to a missionary farewell or homecoming with her. If there's a member in our Mormon Spectrum group that's giving a talk in church, I'll go and support those people, and I'll go with my wife. But my wife wants me to do what spiritually feeds me, and going and sitting and listening to a talk about American exceptionalism or the gospel of Jesus Christ they don't talk about any of the teachings of Jesus from the Gospels. That's just not helpful for me.
If we could wave a magic wand and change the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are there changes that could be made that would get you to get rebaptized and go back? Or is that ship sailed?
It would need to be a stage 5 faith organization.
So if it became Community of Christ overnight, you'd do it? You'd rejoin?
Today, I think I would.
Nice.
But it wouldn't be the same church.
No.
All the conservative members would have thought it was an apostasy and left.
Oh, yeah.
Because women would have the priesthood, we'd have a gay bishop. The word of wisdom would be the way it is canonized. It's not a commandment. Bring your coffee to church.
No one true church.
No one true church.
No exclusive authority.
Abraham's not a person.
Don't have to believe
Scripture's is figurative. Instead of spending $1 to $2 billion a year on the BYUs, we'd be spending $1 to $2 billion a year making a difference in the world. Matthew 25:34 through 40 stuff. Yeah, if they did those kinds of things, I would totally experience divinity in the participation of that.
Are you tempted to follow the example of John Hamer, Gina Colvin, and Brian? What's Brian?
Brian Whitney.
Brian Whitney. Any interest in the possibility of joining another church someday?
I church shop.
If they're a stage 5 church?
I church shop. I don't know. I can't answer that question.
It's not a no.
It's not a no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're open to it?
Yeah, I want to talk about the story of the woman taken in adultery and how beautiful that is.
Do you miss church?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you miss the spirituality and faith community and all that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Is now the best time in the world ever to be a post-Mormon?
I don't think there was ever a better time.
Yeah. Are you excited about that?
I am so excited about it. Sunstone this week was like EFY for adults with deep conversations that are real and honest. Like it was amazing. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a post-Mormon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, because I've got to run and we love our listeners who have been sticking with us all throughout this. So shout out to them. How can people follow you, and what can people look for from, Anthony in the months and years ahead?
So you can find me on unpackingambiguity.com. That's my blog. I'll post links to this interview there. You can find me on Facebook. You can email me at unpackingambiguity@gmail.com. You're going to find me presenting at Sunstone and at Thrive conferences, things like that. And You know, a lot of people have asked if I'd write a book, and I probably will eventually write a book. So I'll tell my story in my book and how I reconciled things. And there were a lot of people that wanted to know specifically how I parse things. You know, like somebody said, what do I do when my active believing family members are like really pushing me? They want to know why I've left. And I'm like, I asked her, is your well-being reliant on their reaction to that? And she said, yeah, kind of. And I'm like, well, then you just need to tell them the least possible. I stumbled across the essays. I can't reconcile the information, and I need to take a break while I work it out. I'm still seeking divinity in my life, you know. So people have appreciated the way I parse things, and I think a book that shares those kinds of things might be helpful to people. You know, they can adapt it to what works for them.
All right, Anthony Miller. Well, you've been a delight. You've exceeded my very, very high expectations.
Thank you.
We've talked for, I don't know, 8 hours maybe.
Is that long?
7, something like that. But you're awesome.
We'll have to do the
still have to do the Thrive thing.
Presentation, so we'll do that.
But we can do that over
we can
Zoom,
do that over Zoom
or another time.
Sure, absolutely.
I think we could have you on for lots of things if you're willing, because I think there's a lot of wisdom you have to share with people, and I'd love to give you my microphone for that cause if you'll come back.
I will come back. That's very kind. I'll actually be back for a wedding in Lehi in a couple next week, actually. So maybe I can stay an extra day or something.
Okay,
we'll figure it out.
All right. Any final words you want to give to our audience? Look them in the camera and say.
I just, you know, I would hope that you know how grateful I am to be here today. And for you. So, know that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks, Anthony. We feel that way about you. You're a sweetheart.
Thank you.
You are a sweetheart.
Thank you.
And you took the hard questions. I threw some hard ones at you.
Throw any one you want. Yeah, thank you.
You're amazing. All right, Anthony. Thanks again. You're awesome.
Thank you.
Wasn't he great? Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Please email him or us. You can email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. Thanks to everyone who supports us. We couldn't do this without your financial support. Anthony, thank you for your financial support. Sorry to out you. I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
If you want to support us, we require your support. We need it. mormonstories@gmail.com. You can donate, make a monthly donation. It's tax deductible. It all goes towards our mission, and we really appreciate it. Huge thanks to Cody Layton for doing our multimedia production, spending all day with us. He's amazing, and we're grateful for him. We're grateful for our board of directors and all our supporters. Please stay tuned for more cool stuff in the weeks and months ahead on Mormon Stories podcast. Check out all the cool podcasts and organizations that Anthony talked about as well, because we love our big, huge, beautiful Mormon community. You guys take care, give us feedback, and we'll see you guys soon on another episode of Mormon Stories. Take care.